The massive space station called Nexus Prime had never seen anything like this before. Ships from every corner of the galaxy were arriving one after another, their crews desperate and afraid. The station's central meeting hall, big enough to hold a small city, was packed with alien beings who had never worked together before. Some floated in the air, others crawled on multiple legs, and a few existed as pure energy inside special containers. The reason for this gathering was simple and terrifying. The Vorthan Empire was eating the galaxy alive. These creatures weren't just conquering planets, they were absorbing entire star systems, turning everything into fuel for their growing war machine. Their ships looked like living nightmares, part machine and part flesh, constantly changing and adapting to whatever weapons were used against them. Every species that had ever ruled space was now facing the same fate, complete destruction. The proud Zephyrhites, who had controlled trade routes for thousands of years, watched helplessly as their crystal cities were consumed. The ancient Kalari, who moved as one mind across millions of bodies, found their hive networks being torn apart. Even the mysterious Etherians, who could bend reality itself to their will, were losing world after world. When the Zephyrite representative stood up, the entire hall fell silent. These crystal beings had survived longer than most civilizations, and their wisdom was respected across the galaxy. "We offer our fleet of 10,000 light vessels," the ambassador announced, his voice ringing like chimes. "Each ship can move at the speed of thought and strike with the power of a small star." The crowd murmured in approval. 10,000 ships was no small contribution. But then the Kalari speaker rose, and the sound was like a million voices speaking, as one. "We pledge 50,000 fighters," the collective voice declared, each pilot connected to our hive mind, able to move as one perfect unit. The hall erupted in cheers. 50,000 ships working together like a single organism would be a force to reckon with. But the real surprise came when the Etherian delegate appeared. Not walked, but simply materialized at the center of the room. These beings were so old that some said they had watched the first stars being born. "Our dreadnoughts will join this fight," the Etherian said, its voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. "We offer ships that can fold space itself into weapons." The crowd knew what this meant. Etherian dreadnoughts were legendary. Just one could destroy entire fleets by turning the fabric of reality against its enemies. As each great power announced their contribution, hope began to spread through the assembly. Maybe, just maybe, they could stop the Vorthans. The combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations had never been brought together like this before. Then something unexpected happened. A small figure walked to the speaking platform. She was human, barely 5.5 feet tall, with simple clothes and no fancy technology. Her name was Lee Hana, and she represented Earth, a tiny blue planet that most of the galaxy barely knew existed. The hall grew quiet, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. What could these newcomers possibly offer? Humans had only learned to travel between stars about 100 years ago. Most species in the room had been exploring space for thousands of years before humans even discovered fire. Hana stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was calm and clear as she spoke. "Earth pledges one ship to this alliance." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The ship Defiance will meet your fleet at the agreed location. For exactly 3 seconds, you could—" Ev heard a pin drop in that massive hall. Then the laughter started. It began as quiet chuckles, but quickly grew into roaring laughter that echoed off the walls. The Vorthan delegate, a horrifying creature that looked like someone had mixed a tank with a living tree, actually stood up and started clapping mockingly. "One ship," the Vorthan creature called out, its voice like grinding metal. "From a species that just learned to leave their home planet. How absolutely precious." The laughter grew louder. Even the normally polite Zephyrite counselor couldn't help himself. He leaned over to his assistant and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe they could carry supplies between our real warships. Or perhaps deliver messages. That might be useful." Other delegates joined in the mockery. "Do they even have weapons on their ship?" asked one. "Maybe they plan to ram the Vorthans," suggested another, causing fresh waves of laughter. Hana stood at the podium through it all, her face showing no emotion. She had expected this reaction. Earth's leaders had warned her that the galaxy would not take humanity seriously. But she had a job to do, and she was going to do it with dignity. When the laughter finally died down, Hana spoke again. "The Defiance will be at the coordinates you provide. We will fight alongside you." She gathered her simple datapad and turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, the comments continued to follow her. "Such a brave little species," one delegate said with fake sympathy. "It's almost sad," said another. "They have no idea what they're getting into." But Hana kept walking. She had delivered her message, and now it was time to go home and prepare. The galaxy might be laughing at humanity's contribution now, but she knew something they didn't. Sometimes, the smallest things could make the biggest difference, and humanity had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realized. As the great powers of the galaxy began planning their war, making lists of ships and weapons and battle formations, humanity was completely forgotten. After all, what difference could one small ship possibly make in a war that would decide the fate of the entire galaxy? Captain Park Ji-won walked slowly across the bridge of the Defiance, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. Roland. The most incredible scene in human history was unfolding. 50,000 people were working inside this single ship, and every one of them was the absolute best at what they did. These weren't just soldiers or engineers. They were artists, scientists, doctors, teachers, and dreamers who had all volunteered for what might be humanity's final mission. Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Kim Min-ho was running his hands along pipes that hummed with power from a dozen different worlds. "All systems are running perfectly, Captain," he reported through his headset. Min-ho had spent 15 years studying alien technology, learning how the Zephyrite made their ships move at impossible speeds, how the Kolari created engines that never seemed to break down, and how the Etherians powered their vessels with pure thought. On the weapons deck, Tactical Officer Choi Soo-min was making final checks on systems that looked nothing like traditional human weapons. "Everything's ready down here," she called out. Soo-min had trained with alien weapon masters from 6 different species, learning not just how to fire their guns, but why they were designed the way they were. Her weapons weren't copies. They were something entirely new. At the navigation station, Officer Yoon Hae-jin was plotting their jump to the meeting point with the Allied fleet. His screens showed star maps that combined human knowledge with information from every spacefaring race in the galaxy. "Course is set, Captain. We can leave whenever you're ready." Looking at the Defiance from the outside, you would never guess what it really was. The ship looked simple, almost boring compared to other vessels in space. It didn't have the flowing, living curves of Vorthon bioships that seemed to breathe and pulse with life. It wasn't covered in the crystal growths that made Zephyrite. Vessels looked like flying jewels. It lacked the impossible geometric shapes of Etherian ships that hurt your eyes to look at directly, but that plain appearance was exactly what humanity wanted. For the past 100 years, ever since humans first met alien life, they had been doing something that no other species had ever tried. Instead of perfecting one type of technology like everyone else, humans had been learning from everyone they met. When the Zephyrite taught humans about their crystal-based computing systems, human engineers didn't just copy them. They figured out how to combine crystal computing with Kolari bioneural networks and Etherian quantum processors. The result was a computer system that could think in ways that amazed even its creators. Every time humans made a trade deal with an alien species, they asked questions. How do your ships work? Why do you build them that way? What problems are you trying to solve? Most aliens were happy to explain, thinking that these young humans were just curious. They never imagined that humans were taking notes, learning, and planning. The Defiance was the result of all that learning. Its hull was made from metal that humans had learned to create by studying how 5 different alien races built their ships. The engines used principles that the Etherians had discovered, improved with techniques the Kolari had developed, and powered by energy sources the Zephyrite had perfected. But the real secret wasn't any single piece of technology. It was how everything worked together. Humans had always been good at taking ideas from different places and mixing them in new ways. On Earth, They had learned to combine Asian martial arts with European fencing, African music with American instruments, and cooking techniques from every culture on the planet. Now they were doing the same thing with alien technology, but on a scale that no one had ever attempted before. The weapons could switch between different types of energy based on what they were fighting. The shields could adapt by using techniques from multiple species at once. Even the life support systems were designed using the best ideas from a dozen different worlds. Communications Officer Song Minji looked up from her station. "Captain, we're getting signals from the Allied fleet. They're sending us the coordination frequencies, so we can talk to their ships during the battle." Ji-won nodded but didn't smile. "Keep our communications quiet for now. Don't respond to any of their signals unless it's absolutely necessary." "You want them to keep thinking we're not important?" "Exactly. Let them focus on their own preparations. The less attention we get, the better." Through the large windows at the front of the bridge, stars were streaking past as the Defiance moved through space faster than light. Each streak of light represented a sun with its own planets, its own stories, and possibly its own life forms that might soon be consumed by the Vorthans if this mission failed. The crew worked quietly, each person focused on their job, but also thinking about what lay ahead. They all knew that other species saw humans as weak newcomers who had gotten lucky by discovering space travel. Most aliens thought humans were brave but foolish for volunteering to fight in this war. What none of them realized was that humanity's greatest strength had never been raw power or advanced technology. Humans were survivors who had learned to adapt to any situation. On Earth, they had survived ice ages, natural disasters, diseases, and wars by learning, changing, and working together. Now they were about to show the galaxy what humans could do when they had a whole universe of knowledge to learn from. The Defiance wasn't just one ship. It was the combined wisdom of every species humanity had ever met, transformed into something that had never existed before. As the ship jumped through space toward the greatest battle in galactic history, Captain Ji-won allowed herself one small smile. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. The Kepler Nebula had always been one of the most beautiful places in the galaxy. Swirling clouds of purple and gold gas stretched for light years, dotted with newborn stars that sparkled like diamonds. But on this day, that beauty was shattered as the largest space battle in galactic history began. The Vorthan fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare coming to life. Their ships didn't look like anything built by intelligent beings. They looked like they had grown in some alien garden of horrors. Massive biovessels pulsed with veins of light, their hulls breathing like living creatures. Some ships had tentacles that writhed through space, while others sprouted spikes and claws that seemed to reach out hungrily toward their enemies. But the most terrifying sight was the sheer number of them. Thousands upon thousands of Vorthan. Vessels filled space, blocking out entire stars. Their fighter swarms moved like clouds of angry insects, each one capable of learning and adapting to whatever attacked it. And floating behind the main fleet were the dreaded harvester ships. Massive creatures that could eat defeated vessels and use their metal and technology to make themselves stronger. The Galactic Alliance fleet was impressive too, but in a completely different way. Admiral Kang Tae-hyun's Zephyrite light cruisers were works of art, their crystal hulls catching and bending light into rainbow patterns. When they fired their weapons, beams of pure energy carved through space like swords made of starlight, leaving trails of brilliant color that lasted for minutes. Commander Bai Jin-soo coordinated the Kolari attack from his command ship, but he wasn't really giving orders in the way humans understood it. The Kolari pilots were all connected to each other through their hive mind, sharing thoughts and reactions instantly. When they launched their living missiles, creatures bred specifically for war, each weapon knew exactly where every other missile was going and could adjust its path to create the perfect attack pattern. The Etherian dreadnoughts were the most frightening ships on the Alliance side. These vessels looked like someone had taken geometry and twisted it into impossible shapes. They had angles that seemed to fold in on themselves and surfaces that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions at once. When they fired their weapons, Reality itself seemed to bend and tear around their targets. For the first few minutes of the battle, it looked like the Galactic Alliance might actually win. Zephyreet energy beams sliced through Vorthon bioships, causing them to bleed strange fluids into space. Kalari missiles found their targets with perfect precision, exploding in coordinated waves that tore apart enemy formations. The Etherian. Reality benders created zones where the laws of physics simply stopped working, crushing Vorthon vessels that got too close. But then something terrible began to happen. The Vorthon ships started to change. Biovessels that had been damaged by energy weapons began growing new armor that scattered the beams harmlessly. Fighter craft that had been destroyed by Kalari missiles were replaced by new versions that could detect and avoid the living weapons. Even the reality-bending attacks of the Etherians began to lose their effect as Vorthon ships developed some kind of resistance to having physics twisted around them. This was the Vorthon's most terrifying ability. They learned. Every attack that hit them made them stronger. Every tactic used against them was studied, understood, and countered. It was like fighting an enemy that got smarter every time you hurt it. The tide of battle began to turn. Vorthon bioships that should have been destroyed were healing their wounds faster than the Alliance could inflict new ones. Fighter swarms that had been scattered reformed with new tactics that made them nearly impossible to hit. And worst of all, the Harvester ships began moving forward, their massive jaws opening to consume disabled Alliance vessels. Admiral Kang watched in horror as one of his beautiful crystal cruisers was caught by a Harvester. The alien ship's biomechanical mouth closed around the Zephyrite vessel and began dissolving it, absorbing its technology and energy. Within minutes, the Harvester had grown larger and sprouted new weapons based on Zephyrite crystal technology. Through all of this chaos, one ship remained strangely quiet. The human vessel Defiance hung back from the main battle, seemingly trying to stay out of harm's way. To the alien commanders fighting desperately for their lives, this looked like the worst kind of cowardice. "Look at the humans," Admiral Kang transmitted bitterly to his fellow commanders as another of his ships was destroyed. "They hide in the back while real warriors die." Commander Bay's response came through the hive mind network, carrying the anger of 50,000 Colliery pilots. "We should have expected this. They offered one ship because they never intended to use it." Even the normally emotionless Etherian fleet commander expressed disgust. The humans reveal their true nature. They are observers, not warriors. But on the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Park Ji-won was anything but a coward. She stood calmly in the center of her command deck, watching dozens of screens that showed the battle from every possible angle. Her crew worked silently around her, analyzing every detail of the fight with an intensity that would have surprised the alien commanders who thought they were hiding. Intelligence Officer Oh Seo-min looked up from her station, where streams of data flowed across multiple displays. "Captain, I've got it. The Vorthon adaptation system, it's not magic. Their bioships are all connected through a distributed neural network. Each ship learns from the experiences of all the others, but there's a delay in how information spreads. Through the network." Ji-won nodded slowly. This was exactly what they had hoped to discover. "How long is the delay?" "Roughly 43 seconds for new adaptations to spread across their entire fleet. And the network has weak points, nodes that coordinate information flow between different groups of ships." "Perfect." Ji-won turned to her tactical officer. "Seo-min, transmit the coordinates of those network nodes to all weapons stations. Hai-jin, plot a course that will take us past each node in sequence." As the Defiance finally began to move, the other Alliance commanders assumed the humans were finally joining the battle. But they weren't heading toward the main fight where ships were dying by the hundreds. Instead, the human vessel began flying in what looked like a completely random pattern, darting between debris fields and empty patches of space. "What are they doing?" Admiral Kang wondered aloud as he watched the human ship's strange movements. None of them realized that humanity was about to show the galaxy something it had never seen before. What happened when you combined the knowledge of every spacefaring civilization into a single, perfectly coordinated attack? The Defiance moved through the battlefield like a ghost, weaving between the wreckage of destroyed ships and floating debris. To the alien commanders watching, it looked like the humans were doing the most shameful thing possible, picking through the remains of their fallen allies while the battle still raged around them. Admiral Kang's voice crackled with fury over the communication channels. "The humans are looting our dead. They're taking salvage from our destroyed vessels while we're still fighting for our lives." Commander Bay's response came through the colliery hive mind, carrying the outrage of thousands of connected pilots. "This is beyond cowardice. They're stealing from the graves of heroes." Even the usually calm Etherian fleet commander expressed disgust. "Perhaps we misjudged them. We thought they were simply weak. We didn't realize they were without honor." But the alien commanders were wrong about everything they were seeing. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Park Ji-won was orchestrating the most complex military operation in galactic history. Every seemingly random movement of her ship was carefully planned, and every strange action had a purpose that would soon become clear. Science Officer Nam Hyun-jin sat at a control station surrounded by dozens of screens showing data streams that looked like digital waterfalls. "Drone network is fully deployed, Captain," he reported. "We now have over 3,000 scanning devices spread across the entire battlefield." To the other species, these looked like simple sensor drones, the kind used to gather information about enemy movements. But they were actually something far more sophisticated. Each drone was broadcasting specific sound frequencies that were designed to interfere with the neural networks that connected Vorthan bioships to each other. The Vorthan ships had been sharing information instantly, allowing them to adapt to any attack within seconds. But now static was building up in their communications. The bioships were starting to lose their connection to the collective intelligence that made them so dangerous. "How are the interference patterns working?" Ji-won asked. "Better than we hoped," Nam replied, his fingers dancing across his controls. "The Vorthan ships are beginning to act independently instead of as a coordinated fleet. Their adaptation rate is dropping significantly." At the weapons station, Officer Lim Young-ho was doing something that would have seemed impossible to any single alien species. His hands moved across controls that switched between completely different types of technology every few seconds. "Firing Zephyrite crystal beam at target coordinates," he announced, and a brilliant beam of light shot out from the Defiance. But this wasn't a copied Zephyrite weapon. It was a human-built gun that used Zephyrite principles combined with Kolari bioengineering and Etherian quantum mechanics. The beam struck what appeared to be empty space, but the humans knew better. Their sensors, which combined technology from 6 different alien races, could see things that no single species could detect. Hidden Vorthan command ships, invisible to normal sensors, were being systematically destroyed. Switching to Kolari. "Bioprojectiles," Young-ho continued, and suddenly the Defiance was firing living missiles that moved like intelligent creatures. But these weren't pure Kolari weapons either. They had been modified with Etherian space-folding technology, allowing them to appear inside enemy ships without having to penetrate their armor. The most amazing thing was happening to the Defiance itself. The ship seemed to be in multiple places at once, flickering in and out of visibility like a ghost. This was the result of combining 3 different alien technologies in a way that none of their creators had ever imagined. Zephyrite light bending. Technology made the ship nearly invisible to normal sight. Kolari hive mind principles allowed it to coordinate perfectly with damaged allied vessels, sharing information instantly, and Etherian space-folding techniques let it appear to be in several locations simultaneously. "This is impossible, Admiral," Kang transmitted, watching the human ship phase in and out of existence. "How are they doing that?" But the humans weren't finished revealing their secrets. Tactical analyst Jung Min-woo looked up from his station with excitement in his voice. "Captain, the Vorthan adaptation rate has dropped below critical levels. Their bioships can't develop countermeasures fast enough to keep up with our changing attack patterns. For decades, humanity had been studying the Vorthans in secret. While other species saw them as an unstoppable force of nature, human intelligence, officers had been treating them like a puzzle to be solved. They had discovered that the Vorthans' greatest strength, their ability to adapt, was also their greatest weakness. The bioships could learn from any attack, but they needed time to process new information and develop countermeasures. By constantly switching between different types of technology and by disrupting their communication networks, the humans had created a situation where the Vorthans couldn't adapt fast enough. "All stations," Captain G1 announced, her voice calm but filled with determination, "begin the systematic dismantling of the Vorthan fleet." What happened next was like watching a master craftsman at work. The Defiance began moving through the Vorthan fleet with surgical precision, its weapons constantly changing to stay ahead of enemy adaptations. When bioships began developing resistance to energy weapons, the humans switched to physical projectiles. When the Vorthans adapted to those, the humans used reality-bending attacks that made the laws of physics stop working around their targets. But the most incredible part was how the humans began coordinating with the rest of the galactic fleet. Using communication methods borrowed from the Kolari hive mind, they started sending tactical information to allied ships, telling them exactly where to attack and when. "Zephyrite Cruiser Formation 7, came G1's voice over the communication channels. "Fire crystal beams at coordinates I'm transmitting now. Kolari swarm units, deploy biomissiles at the targets I'm highlighting. Etherian dreadnoughts, prepare reality-fold attacks on the command vessels." The alien commanders were stunned. Suddenly their weapons were becoming effective again. Vorthan ships that had been adapting to their attacks were being destroyed before they could develop new countermeasures. "How do they know where to strike?" Admiral Kang asked in amazement as his crystal beams began slicing through enemy bioships that had been immune to his weapons just minutes before. The answer was simple but revolutionary. Humans didn't specialize in one type of technology like every other species in the galaxy. Instead, they had spent a century learning from everyone, combining different approaches in ways that created something entirely new. The Defiance wasn't just a ship. It was a living example of what happened when you took the best ideas from every civilization and mixed them together with human creativity and determination. And now, for the first time in galactic history, the Vorthans were facing an enemy that could adapt faster than they could. The tide of battle was turning, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't advanced technology or ancient wisdom. It was the ability to bring everyone together and help them become stronger than they ever imagined possible. The Defiance moved through the Vorthan fleet like a deadly dancer, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to target it effectively. What made the ship so terrifying wasn't its size or firepower. It was the way it constantly changed everything about how it fought. One moment, the human ship was firing brilliant beams of crystal energy that cut through bioship armor like butter. The next second, it switched to living missiles that burrowed through enemy hulls and exploded from the inside. When the Vorthans began adapting to those attacks, the Defiance suddenly started using weapons that bent reality itself, creating zones where the bioships simply stopped existing. Captain Park Ji-won stood calmly in the center of her bridge, watching as her crew performed what could only be called a masterpiece of warfare. "Weapons, switch to Pattern 7 Alpha," she ordered. "Navigation, execute evasive sequence 12. Communications, coordinate with Zephyrite Formation 4. At the weapons station, Officer Lim Young-ho's hands flew across controls that would have confused engineers from any single alien species. His weapons console looked like it had been built by a dozen different civilizations because it had been. "Switching from Etherian reality fold to Kolari bioplasma," he reported. "Target is adapting to quantum attacks, so moving to biological warfare." The result was devastating. Just as a massive Vorthan bioship began developing defenses against the reality-bending weapons, it was hit by organic acids that ate through its living hull faster than it could regenerate. The creature ship writhed in space like a wounded animal before going dark. But the most incredible thing happening wasn't the destruction of enemy vessels, it was what Coordination Officer Seo Jin-young was doing from her station. She was simultaneously talking to hundreds of allied ships, giving each one specific instructions based on their unique capabilities and the current battle situation. "Zephyrite Cruiser Crystal Wind, Your port weapons array is damaged but still functional, she transmitted. I'm sending you instructions for a temporary repair using Kalari biometal techniques. You'll be back to full combat effectiveness in 4 minutes. Kalari Swarm Leader Bay, your fighters are taking heavy losses in Sector 7. I'm transmitting coordinates for a tactical withdrawal to grid position 12, where Etherian Dreadnought Voidwalker can provide cover fire. What amazed the alien commanders was that the repair instructions actually worked. Ships that should have been destroyed were getting back into the fight using techniques that combined the engineering knowledge of multiple species. The humans somehow knew how to make Zephyrite crystal technology work with Kalari biological systems, and how to integrate both with Etherian quantum mechanics. How is this possible? Admiral Kang asked over the communication channels as his damaged cruiser began healing itself using biometal patches that a human had taught his engineers to install. These technologies were never designed to work together. That's the point, came Captain Jiwon's voice in response. Every species in the galaxy perfected one type of technology and stuck with it. You never tried mixing different approaches, because you already had something that worked perfectly for you. The battle was turning into something unprecedented in galactic history. What had started as a desperate last stand by the combined forces of civilization was becoming a coordinated assault that the Vorthans couldn't adapt to fast enough. The human ship continued its deadly dance, but now it wasn't fighting alone. Under human coordination, the entire galactic fleet was working together like a single organism. Zephyrite light cruisers provided cover for Kalari fighters, who in turn protected Etherian dreadnoughts as they prepared their reality-bending attacks. Ships that had been retreating in defeat were now returning to battle with renewed purpose. The humans had shown them exactly where to position themselves to be most effective, and had given them the knowledge to repair damage using techniques from other civilizations. Vorthan adaptation rate has dropped to near 0, reported Tactical analyst Young Minwoo. They can't keep up with our constantly changing attack patterns, and their communication network is still disrupted by our interference drones. The end came faster than anyone expected. The Vorthan bioships, which had seemed unstoppable just hours before, began shutting down one by one. Without their ability to adapt and learn, they were just large, complicated creatures floating helplessly in space. The last of the massive harvester ships tried to escape, but the combined fleet pursued it with perfect coordination. Zephyrite beams weakened its bioarmor, Kalari missiles punched through its defenses, and Etherian reality weapons finished it off. Then, suddenly, the battle was over. The Kepler Nebula, which had been filled with the light of weapons fire and explosions, became quiet except for the gentle drift of disabled Vorthan vessels. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The alien commanders couldn't quite believe what had just happened. A species they had dismissed as weak newcomers had just saved the entire galaxy using nothing but intelligence, cooperation, and the willingness to learn from everyone around. Them? Ambassador Li Hana's voice came over all communication frequencies, broadcasting to every ship in the fleet and every listening post across the galaxy. Her words were simple, but they carried a message that would change how civilizations thought about each other forever. To all our allies, and to those listening across the galaxy, she began, humanity wants to make something clear. We didn't come here to prove we were the strongest or the most advanced. We came here to show what becomes possible when different species stop competing and start working together. She paused, letting her words sink in across thousands of ships and billions of listening beings. Every species in this galaxy has perfected something amazing. The Zephyrite's mastered energy manipulation in ways we're still learning to understand. The Kalari created biological engineering that seems like magic to us. The Etherians developed quantum technologies that let them reshape reality itself. The communication channels remained silent as entire civilizations listened. But what happens when you combine all of that knowledge? What becomes possible when you stop thinking about our technology and their technology and start thinking about our shared knowledge? Today, you saw the answer. Admiral Kang was the first to respond, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder. The humans, you've been learning from all of us this whole time, not copying, learning, understanding not just how our technologies work, but why we built them the way we did. And then you made them better, added Commander Bay, speaking. For the collective Kolari consciousness, you took our individual strengths and turned them into something none of us could have created alone. Captain Jiwon's response was heard by every being in the galaxy. That's what humans do best. We adapt, we learn, and we bring people together. We don't want to rule the galaxy or prove we're better than anyone else. We want to help everyone become the best versions of themselves. As the combined fleet began the journey home, something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The great civilizations that had existed in isolation for thousands of years suddenly realized they had been limiting themselves. There was so much they could learn from each other, so much they could accomplish together. The species that had laughed at humanity's single ship now understood they had witnessed the birth of something entirely new, not just a military victory, but a completely different way of thinking about what civilizations could accomplish when they worked together instead of competing against each other. And in the years that followed, when beings across the galaxy told the story of the Battle of Kepler Nebula, they always remembered the lesson that humanity had taught them. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from being the best at one thing, but from helping everyone around you become better than they ever imagined possible.